The GovX Show is supported by Forrester, helping government organisations perform at their best. Visit forrester.com to learn more.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the GovX Show. I'm Tim Coulthard, Community Director here at GovX Digital, and today I have two letters for you, CX, Citizen Experience, Customer Experience, call it what you will depending on which sector you're working in, but in this modern age where the consumer, the customer, the user are central to everything we do, CX is absolutely essential to consider in any sort of public sector strategy. So it's great that we've got CX expert David Wheable from Forrester joining us today. He does a huge amount of work with public sector organisations to help them understand the journey and the outcomes that they need to be thinking about around CX. I'll be along at the end with some information around how David and Forrester are getting involved in the customer experience session at GovX Digital. But in the meantime, let's join David for a conversation to help you understand the CX piece in greater detail. Here we go. So David, welcome back to the GovX Show.
Hi, Tim. How are you?
Good. Great to welcome you again. Looking forward to talking a bit more about customer experience in the public sector. It's a topic that's on everyone's lips still. It's almost never been more important. So we're looking forward to talking through some of that with you. I know you've got a lot of thoughts about how it should be done and how organisations should approach it. So looking forward to getting into that. For those members of our audience that maybe don't know who you are, could you just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you and your role with Forrester?
Sure, yeah. So as you said, my name's Dave Wheable. I'm a vice president and consulting director with Forrester, and I head up Forrester's consulting group in EMEA. For my background, it's mainly from a technology side and technology management side, but obviously from a Forrester research, we cover a number of areas, including customer experience, citizen experience, and particularly sort of working with governments and the impact on governments. So for my group, it's how we apply that research into organizations and help them develop their sort of technology and their customer or citizen experience.
Great. And really, a hugely important topic, as we've already alluded to. So, I mean, the fact that we can reference CX as being customer experience and citizen experience gives a little bit of a suggestion of where some of this thinking comes from. Maybe it's been more prevalent in the private sector for a while, but now it's really top of the agenda in the public sector. So for people that are sort of just starting out on the CX journey, when we're talking about CX, citizen experience in the public sector context, what are those kind of key points of contact and interaction where CX really comes into play most?
Yeah, this is a question that's interesting because it's not purely about public or private, or it's a question that comes up actually across the board in organizations of what is CX and why it's important. Really trying to simplify it down, it's fundamental. It's if any interaction involves people, then the experience is going to be a key part of that interaction. So the simple way to look at it is, if people are involved, what sort of experience do they have? What type of interaction do they want to have? And really understanding how you create a good experience around those interactions. The other key point here is we're not talking of digital only interactions. We're actually talking about any interaction, be that person, be that digital, or be that in any other way. So it's looking at those points of contact between organizations and people, and how they can be improved.
Okay, good to get a framework around that and really define what we're talking about. And I'm interested, so you're obviously working in the CX piece a lot in your role. How are you and Forrester interacting with sort of public sector agencies in terms of helping them along this CX journey?
We can help in a number of ways. I mean, really understanding what CX is for a start is very, very important. So we can help people understand what determines a good experience, how to actually create that sort of vision of what the experience should be, and the types of experiences they want to create for the citizens, or for customers, or the public in general, depending on the type of organization. But also then the starting with the tools to actually start, understanding that customer journey mapping, understanding things like ethnographic studies, to look at really what is the behaviors of people, what are they're telling you, what is it they're not telling you, and then how can you actually build out that into a way of designing your interactions then to promote that good experience. There are lots and lots of different examples around there. If you think about just simply the number of times you have an interaction with an organization, be it government, be it otherwise, that you think could go better. So huge opportunities there. But really what we do is help bring that knowledge of what is a customer experience, what is citizen experience, how to develop the approach, and then how to apply those tools to actually then build that out for the particular organization.
Okay, and I suppose one of the sort of specific aspects of public sector CX is that often, if we're being honest, it's not about creating delight in our users. It's just about a frictionless experience. These are often interactions or activities that are about life admin, whether it's doing your tax or, requesting, a new recycling bin or something fairly run of the mill. It's not about sort of wonderful customer experience in the sort of consumer sector might be. So I suppose often what we find is that good customer experience is sort of forgettable because you hardly notice it, but it's the poor stuff that sort of sticks with people. And so I'd like to unpack this, maybe like, it's not quite the good, the bad and the ugly, but try to understand where it can go wrong, and then on the flip side of that, how organizations can start to get better at it. So in your experience, both as a citizen, but then also obviously in your professional capacity as well, what are the areas, the sort of top mistakes, issues, problems, challenges that you come across and organizations feed back to you in terms of their CX sort of conception and execution?
Usually the first thing that most people sort of get wrong is assuming that CX is it's someone's responsibility, and whereas actually it should permeate through the organization, and it is really a cultural thing. It's not someone's responsibility. It's not a group's responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility. So one of the things that we obviously focus on to start with is really getting that understanding across the organization of why is a good sort of experience, customer or consumer or citizen experience important, and important to everyone. So when you actually said, like, for government organizations, it may not be you're delighting everyone, but there are really good reasons for having or creating a good citizen experience. The biggest actually is you want people to comply. You want people to actually be able to follow the process, do what they're supposed to do, and not try to avoid it. So you may say it's like filling a tax form. It's not a delightful experience for everyone. However, you don't want to make it so painful, so difficult to do that everyone avoids doing it all the time. You actually want to make it in a way, as you said, frictionless, so that people will do it and comply with it, because actually it's not that painful to do. And when you get the compliance, and when you get that, actually that's helping the business, if you like, of being a government, because it's reducing the costs of chasing things down. It's reducing the non-compliance aspects of how the systems are working. And actually you can focus then on actually what is it that you need to do, rather than all that sort of background chasing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if we sort of flip that on its head, and we understand where some of the areas might be that organizations go wrong, what are the key points that they should be looking to address in terms of, yes, we're doing the right things? If there was a sort of checklist of areas to get right and areas to focus on, what would they be in terms of CX?
It's really part of a journey from here. So many organizations, again, public and private, are sort of learning about CX as they go on this journey. So there's the obvious one of starting out, the quick wins, just trying to find those difficult areas, those bits where things are particularly painful or challenging, and just trying to address them. Sort of the second part then is the awareness, that understanding of what it means for an organization, what it means for citizens, and starting to really build that vision of what the experience that you want to provide. Now, that's really different to the past, if you think about it, because the past was very much around, we need to run a process, we need to build people into a process, and we're constrained by how we can do that. One advantage of modern technology is it frees us from a lot of those constraints, so we can actually really focus on that experience. So being able to pull information, not have to enter information multiple times, simple things like that can actually really improve the experience. Going forward from there, you can start doing the journey mapping, understanding what is the actual journey, not the process, but the journey that the citizen goes on through different aspects of their life and their interactions with government, and looking at that more holistically than purely with what would be traditional departmental boundaries. And then finally, using that to sort of elevate the experience and understand how to really create the way of working with government, for example, that is actually of benefit to both sides. It creates that synergy and working together to sort of get the right outcomes. But all those tools, all that sort of approach to come through is really what then becomes important. But it's not one step. It's not just do a journey map and then think the project's done, but actually realizing you're building on this, you're using the information, you're feeding it back through, and understanding how to design better and more engaging experiences.
It's interesting, that distinction between the journey and the processes, because I suspect that stepping away from the sort of legacy systems, structures, teams, roles that you have in the organization, and just sort of being agnostic about all of those elements that might be in place and that might potentially be a challenge to unpick or revise or whatever, and just to say completely, let's put ourselves in the shoes of our end users, forget about what we want, what we do, what we think, and just map that journey in a very pure way. I imagine it can be a challenge because, like I said, there's all that stuff that's sitting in the background and people are sort of squeamish about the idea of, you sort of be careful what you wish for, because if we find that everything we've built up to this point doesn't now tally with the way the modern citizen wants to engage with us, we're going to have to do a lot more work. But so I suppose they need to be brave about that in some senses.
Yeah, very much so. And it is, I think, an ongoing part, and it's really linked with, in that sense, digital transformation, and looking at what it actually means to be a digital government or a digital organization. Because I normally compare, as like early digitalization really wasn't digitalization. It was just taking the old manual process, the paper-based processes, and putting them on computer. Nothing really changed. It was essentially the same. And if you look at any of the sort of systems at the moment, they're still very much there. They're almost like a digital replica of the paper-based system. The real challenge with digitalization is saying, we don't need the paper now. So why are we trying to do it that way? What can we do differently? And then, to your point, bringing in almost that sort of citizen focus, the human-centered design, and sort of saying, if we're designing this around the person, not the process, then how would we change this? How would we make this easier? So the amount, again, back to one of the key things we hear from lots of people is they get very frustrated if they have to enter information multiple times.
Yeah.
And simple things like that, saying, well, actually, if I have this information, I know about it, why am I asking them to type it in? Is it simply because it was over here on this form and I need it over here on this form? Can I combine these in some ways to actually shorten that journey, confirm the data, rather than actually have to get them to enter the same thing over and over?
Okay. And the people aspect is interesting. Obviously, there's the people as the end user, but then there's also the people within our public sector organisations. And I'm curious to know if there's a change coming, needed, or has happened around the kinds of people that public sector organisations need inside the building to be able to really deliver and design a good CX strategy. I'm thinking, do we make a switch from sort of people that are very focused on admin and process to people that maybe have come from customer facing backgrounds in different verticals, the leisure industry, tourism, where the customer sort of centric thinking has been always maybe more prevalent? Is there a change happening in the kinds of people we need in the public sector?
I think there's sort of a multiple aspects to this. So it's been clear there is certainly the new way of thinking about it. So as we just discussed, changing that to the human-centered thought processes. So thinking around what does it mean to serve people certainly is important. However, the point I made earlier again was actually, CX is not one person's experience, job. It's not one group's job. It's actually everyone. So I think the change needs to be is just that awareness that everyone who works for an organization can have an impact on that experience, and understanding what they can then do as part of that to improve that sort of experience. And that's actually one of the key things. It's building that cultural aspect of understanding how to drive that. Now, to get that started, you may need sort of different people in there, but eventually it has to permeate through the whole organization. Because if you have, if everyone's looking around saying, actually, well, no, that's someone else's responsibility to ensure this happens, you won't get that overall benefit that you're looking for from trying to drive an organization to look at its citizens, its customers to their benefit.
Yeah, I suppose the labeling something as being a customer role can have pros and cons. I mean, we see lots of roles around sort of head of customer or head of customer experience, whatever it might be. And I think reflecting on that, it's good to have the visibility of that priority being clear. But at the same time, I think what you're saying is that there's a danger that giving somebody a very customer sounding role means everybody else looks at them and says, well, that's your job. Historically, that might have meant running the customer service team, which would be a specific, discrete set of activities. But if that person in that customer role is working across the organization on that cultural piece, then that's where the win is, not in sort of saying, well, you have these 50 people on the phones talking to our citizens and we'll all go about our business as usual. That's the difference that we're trying to shift here, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And as I said, it does go through every team, and whether they are, back office, even if they're back office technology people, actually all those components add together to the experience. And if they identify something that, is actually harming that experience, then they should be empowered to be able to, not necessarily change it directly, but at least have a way of raising that up and understanding, what needs to be changed to help improve the experience. One of the things that the journey mapping exercise can do is if you can map the journey of a citizen or consumer, but actually tie it to the employee journey as well, and actually the employee experience. And where you get those touch points, you can quite often identify where the disconnects are between systems in the back end and actually what's going on from the employee to the citizen. So that sort of almost like bigger view of not just looking at the end experience, but understanding all the sort of systems that go to support that interaction can really highlight when things are difficult. I think we've all probably been on a sort of a service center sort of call where someone, the agent's blaming the computer system for being slow or things like that. And it's sort of like, well, is that really the case? Is that, but quite often you can feel the frustration in their terms that they want to help you and they're being stopped.
That's not one of the options I can click here. So I'm not sure where it is. I mean, the sort of technology and systems piece is interesting. It's like we said, I think the people part and the cultural part is huge, but there is a sort of technology dimension to this to some degree. We can be using technology in our public sector organizations to help facilitate some of these better outcomes and better experiences. But I know for a lot of organizations, there's lots of products out there potentially, but what are the key considerations you would urge public sector bodies to be thinking about if they're sort of looking to build out a technological approach or dimension to the CX piece? Where would they start with their thinking?
Well, again, it comes back to understanding that journey. So actually understanding all the touch points, the traditional touch points and the digital touch points, but also recognizing what really Forrester identified a few years ago is that this power has shifted from organizations to the customer or the citizen on how they want to interact with you. So the key one is you can't tell the citizen how they want to interact with you. They will choose their device, they'll choose their time, they will choose how they want to interact with you. The key thing for you is being able to be flexible enough to allow those different types of interaction at different stages. So the example I sort of use that everyone's sort of familiar with is if you think back quite a way is if you wanted a mortgage with a bank, you would have to phone the bank. They would arrange for you to come in, you to see the bank manager. You would, basically you would have to fit to their timing, their process, their opening hours. Now everything is, well, actually, I want to look and I'm on my phone. I want to look now. I want to do it, at this particular time. So the banks have had to adapt so that their systems actually support you when you want to on the device that you want to interact with. And that's actually the key thing about the technology when you're thinking about these interactions. It shouldn't be locking into one particular way of interacting, but actually understanding the different styles of interaction that the citizens want and using the technology to support those. So it's important then that you're not thinking just one dimensionally here. There'll be some group of people that actually are very comfortable with technology, don't want to talk to a person. There are others actually still that are quite nervous or don't understand things and want to actually interact with a person. It's ensuring that you're not trying to do one or the other, but actually allowing for these different groups to have the access that suits them the best.
Absolutely. And I'd like to sort of finish off by maybe looking further ahead, if that's possible, in a world that's just, shown what it's shown in the last year, that you never know what's coming down the track. But a lot of organizations are getting some of this point now. They're catching up with sectors like, finance and banking, who maybe took that customer-centric approach a little bit earlier. But are there any sort of opportunities and sort of leaps coming on in how public sector organizations can be working with the emerging and changing demands and expectations of their citizens? What's next coming down the track in terms of CX?
I'm not sure I can think of absolutely what's next, because one of the things you actually highlighted earlier, which was interesting, is that everyone expects a good experience now. The trouble is, a good experience is not memorable. It's actually quite forgettable because it just works. So one of the things that we know that happens with CX is that to actually continue to improve CX is an ongoing journey. It is something that actually means that you need to keep improving, because if you try and just stay the same, you actually go backwards in the view of people. So what I think is going to come, particularly with government, is this much more joined up, much more continual approach. So whereas what I see at the moment is still very much process oriented, very much single point interactions, if you like. So it's more functional about doing certain things rather than actually what the interactions should be designed at to being with the government. So I know the one that's been is a classic example is with tax forms. Why do we actually have to do a tax form when all the information is there? Why can't we actually make the tax system work more like a bank account where it's just ongoing transactions and you treat it as a transaction that goes and you have an account? I know that's been sort of trialed in some form, but that's a sort of example where you have this ongoing interaction rather than these sort of annual scheduled interactions.
Yeah, those big scary dates that loom on the horizon and everybody avoids, and then you get the non-compliance that you talked about earlier. So yes. Yeah, just that. Yeah, I guess it's not going to be some huge kind of leap and conceptual leap, but it's just going to be a continual series of incremental improvements and adaptations that, before we know it, we've moved the needle without even noticing it. I guess there's lots of elements just to incrementally improve as we go. Yeah. I mean, it's been a brilliant conversation. And I'm pleased that we're going to be able to explore some of these topics more at the GovX Digital Conference in May. Really pleased that Forrester are continuing to sort of be part of that. And I know you're taking part in one of our sessions as well. So we're going to be looking at some of the, the next aspects of digital services and customer experience and user-centered design and all that really interesting stuff that really makes a big difference. So we're looking forward to welcoming you, and I'm interested to find out from you what you're looking forward to sharing with our audience as we kind of continue the dialogue.
Yeah, I'm excited to sort of bring Forrester's latest research, to sort of the audience, and particularly to just to continue the conversation. I do think that government CX is a huge area for development. So I'm actually interested also from hearing back from people about how they're looking and addressing these challenges, and and really how they see this developing as we go forward, because that's sort of a great interest to me, and certainly the application of technology into that as well.
Yeah, that spirit of collaboration has never been more important. I think I find myself saying that several times a week to people we're having conversations with, because we're going to have less resources. That's just a fact of it. You know, we are where we are, so we've got to make the best of what we had in terms of knowledge, skills, sharing, collaboration. So yeah, we're glad to be part of that process of sort of sharing those ideas, and great to have you on board as well. So it's been a great conversation. You know, CX is one of those topics that matters to everybody, and every organization has a part to play, and everybody within those organizations has a part to play. So brilliant to bring some of that to light again, and have a really good conversation. So just remains to say, David, thanks so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to hosting you in May.
Thank you, Tim. Looking forward to it.
So thanks again to David Wheable from Forrester for joining me for another conversation around customer experience and citizen experience in government. Delighted to say that David will be joining us for our panel discussion on government CX at GovX Digital 2021 coming up in May. Specifically, that session is on the 19th of May, starting at 8:30 a.m. British time. So a diary-friendly session to help you kickstart your day with a customer-centric view of the world. Joining David on that panel session will be our own David Wild, who's GM for Government at GovX Digital, Sam Brearley, who is from HM Courts and Tribunals Service, Simon King, who's from DWP Digital, and Sarah Whitehead, who's from the Intellectual Property Office. A great lineup of public sector leaders who are really making change happen around CX, so one not to be missed. You can sign up for that session via the link in the show notes accompanying this episode. The good news is, of course, that it's free to register for public sector executives. So join us on that session to continue your CX learning. That's about it for this episode. All it remains for me to say is thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again soon with another public sector changemaker. Goodbye.